FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome, and you are listening to the Financial Survival Network. It's Kerry Lutz here. And when is a bubble not a bubble? Well, I guess when you are living through it, making money, and hoping that it will never end. And we've got Danielle Park with us to discuss that and a whole lot more. Danielle, hey, how are you? It's been a while.
Yes. Hi, Kerry. Nice to be back.
Yeah. So, hey, we're in this bubble. And then we've got people like Elizabeth Warren, who is one of my favorite senators, believe it or not. And she's trying to hold Wall Street accountable, which Wall Street and accountability, it's kind of like cats and dogs. And nobody is really interested in being held accountable ever on Wall Street, are they?
Well, it's such an embarrassing display, Kerry. I was listening to the Senate committee hearings today as I was working away. And, you know, there's all this gobbledygook and deference to the heads of the Fed, and the FDIC chairman is in, and they're basically questioning them on, you know, the strength and stability of the financial system today and what's happened and transpired in the past year and that sort of thing. And finally, it was all nonsense, absolute garbage. Like, nobody asked a pointed question. It was all niceties and politeness. It was all, you know, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I was literally sickened listening to it. And then finally, Elizabeth Warren gets her point, you know, her opportunity to ask questions. And she just simply says this, and I'm going to put the clip on as soon as I can find it on the C-SPAN website. But she basically says, okay, let me just stop you for a second. Let me just ask you a very simple question. You're not the Fed is not a prosecutory body, but it is your job to refer any criminal actors for investigation by the Justice Department. And, you know, you have worked out these billions and billions and billions of dollars of settlements with corporations, with financial companies who have admitted wrongdoing. Then she goes back to the statutes that say that no corporation can be found liable for a criminal act without also naming the actors involved. Because let's face it, no corporation exists without directing minds. And the law in the United States specifically says, as is rational, of course, that you can't find corporations guilty of misconduct if you don't also direct it to the actors behind it. And she says pointedly, how many people, how many individuals have you referred for investigation in the wake of these billions and billions of dollars of settlements and admissions of wrongdoing? And, you know, the FDIC representative tries to sidestep it and question. And she goes, no, let me stop you and ask you again. Let me tell you that after the savings and loan debacle, which we saw in the early 80s, there were no less than 5,500 FBI files opened that were referred from the Fed and other regulators for investigation. More than 5,500 files were opened, more than 1,000 people were prosecuted, and more than 800 actors were convicted and sent to prison. That's what a just and interested society in justice and stamping out crime, that's the kind of action they do for deterrence purposes. But today, the answer is, and he finally relented, the answer was 0. The Fed has referred 0 to the judiciary, to the Justice Department for investigation. So that just says it all. The rest of it is just nonsense. It's check writing funded by the shareholders, cost of doing business that results in bonuses to the people involved. And so, of course, the system is corrupt and run rampant with all this unsavory action. Of course it is. It's a money-making machine. And so my point would be just, again, you know, she's the only person, frankly, who puts this stuff in plain language and goes back to the law. She also goes to them, you know, as she did with Chairman Yellen not too long ago, and as she did again today, to say, second part of her questioning is, you know, how many, what have you taken? What steps have you taken in your mandated, required you're mandated by law to take actions against banks to resolve them or to wind them up or to break them up if they don't put forward a suitable plan for their own controls and checks and resolution in the need in some sort of financial calamity. And if they don't put forward that proposal, the Fed is mandated to act in the public interest and wind them up or whatever is necessary. They've done zero. So that just says it all. You can talk all day long. The point is they keep giving them more time. And every year they say, what's your plan? And they say, well, that's not adequate. And they send them away. And nothing ever happens, Kerry. And so because of that, the whole thing continues to be the biggest financial calamity of all time, the greatest leverage of all time, the greatest risk to the financial system. Just as the demographics are old and can't afford to sort of absorb losses and recover, it's what would be classically termed in my social group as a shit show.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. And there was one person after the financial collapse, 2008, 2009, who did get indicted. One person, and that was mentioned in The Flash Boys by Michael Lewis, which if you haven't read it yet, you really should. I was watching one of those things on the book C-SPAN, and what's his name? Malcolm Gladwell was interviewing Michael Lewis, and it was fascinating. The only guy who got arrested who worked for a major bank was Sergei Alenkinov, and because he might have taken some computer code, the Second Circuit, when they heard the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, when they heard oral argument that day, ordered this guy freed because they knew that it was a put-up job. And what does Goldman do? They go to the DA, the Manhattan DA, and they get him recharged on a very similar charge. And the guy is still fighting for his freedom to this day, but he will probably be let off at some point. But it's just ridiculous.
And John Corzine walks free, and on and on and on. So it's at least again, Elizabeth Warren brought up specifically Jamie Dimon today, and I think Jamie Dimon is the poster child for the excess of this period and the hubris and incredible arrogance of the bankers. Again, we've talked about it before, the Procura hearings and how they put the head of City National Bank on the stand at that time. And he was the poster child for everything that had gone on. And it wasn't until, Procura was able to reveal the fraud and dishonesty and embarrassing conduct that this particular person, as the head of that institution, had, encouraged and perpetrated. It wasn't until then that the public finally seemed to have their aha moment, and the politicians finally seemed to feel embarrassed enough to start doing the right thing. And so, we need some high-profile prosecution, in my view. And no, it's not a witch hunt. There is a ton of people. Pick any one of them. Pick Mr. Corzine if you can. The problem is, once they're billionaires, they are surrounded by this, army of legal protection and political protection that makes it almost impossible to get to them. And that is where democracy breaks down, because there is no rule of law where the people, if you're rich enough, you're too big to prosecute. That is why I believe our society is coming apart at the seams at the moment. Why there's a ton of good people out there trying to do the right thing, but they are overwhelmed by the power and money of those who are trying to do the wrong thing.
Yeah, that is the truth. And it's all going to come back to haunt us when this bubble collapses. It'll probably go on for a while longer, because it just looks like this bubble's just getting fed by a flow of funds, probably capital fleeing, potential blow up of the euro in Europe and what's going on there. Money flowing in from all over the world, flight capital, whatever it is. But, it'll go on until it stops, like these things usually do. But that's kind of what we're faced with, because, like I said so many times, the one thing that we learn from history is that we don't learn from history, right?
Yeah, well, and human behavior is always weak and given to this kind of weakness and perversion from easy money flow. That's typical of human behavior. But so it's not that we ever expect to purge the system of that or to change human behavior so that no one ever thinks and does things that are self-serving to the point of, sacrificing the entire utility of the systems that are essential for the society. We're not talking about any of that. We're just saying it's a very pragmatic thing. You say, we realize that we're prone to these excesses. You can look at a million different times in history where this has been the case. I mean, and all you have to do is therefore set up certain lines and rules that will not be tolerated, because once you allow people to bend that, then the whole system gets skewed towards the wrong side. And so you have to try and, put in some hard lines. Good fences make good neighbors. Good laws make good actors, or at least actors who, at least when they do wrong, will not destroy the whole system. I mean, that's all we're really trying to do. You put in the checks and balances and limitations so that no one actor, no one demented person, or one or three or five demented firms can sacrifice the health of the entire system.
Yeah. And speaking of which, you had a great article on your blog about payday lenders. And, up next, we will talk about the secret network that connects Harvard money to payday loans. If you're not familiar with payday loans, well, if you have a job, you can go borrow next week's pay at the modest rate of 600% per annum interest. And you can borrow next week's pay and the week after and the week after that, and just keep rolling it over, basically, on the Financial Survival Network.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next.
Every week the show is growing. Would you like to be a part of it? Then go to clubfsn.com and help support us with $1, $2, $5, or $10 a month and get a host of premium content with newsletters dropped into your mailbox, free books, private audio clips, webinars, and much more. Then join clubfsn.com. If you want to get ahead of the trend and ensure your family's financial security before it's too late, go to clubfsn.com and sign up.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
In case you're just joining us, we're speaking with Danielle Park of jugglingdynamite.com. And Danielle had an excellent article that came from Bloomberg.com on the secret network that funds the payday loan networks. And it's pretty shocking, Danielle. I mean, all this money, you wonder, like, these payday lenders. I mean, I'm somewhat familiar with them from my prior experience, but I had no idea that these equity funds were involved in them. And, you go online, basically they've always been illegal in New York, payday loans, and in certain other states because of the usury laws, because the interest rate is about 600% a year when you annualize it. And when you need money, you can go online now, give them your bank account info, your employment info, and basically they just advance you next week's pay. And, then you're left scrambling to try to pay it back. And really, these things probably should be illegal, right?
Well, yeah, they're, it's preying on the lowest, the least strong, least able members of our society. So, basically in our hometown, in many cities across Canada now, the biggest growing franchises are the Payday Loans, the junk food restaurants, and the tap parlors. That really says a lot, I think, about where the bifurcation that's going on in our society. Every other store, literally on our hometown main drag, is essentially, bong shops that sell pipes for dope smoking, payday loans, tap parlors, and junk food. That's basically the state of it. So the little boutique-y nice shops are being crowded out by this unsavory underbelly. And, the fact is that people are so innumerate and so desperate financially, and that's the other part of this story, that the ones that even do have a paycheck are needing to, sell it forward a few days each week in order to try and put food in the fridge. So it sounds maybe small, again, because people don't understand the math, but, you'll see a sign that says $20 for $100. Well, that's 20% for a week's loan, so that's when you do the math on that over the course of a year, it's astronomical sums. And so there's no chance they're going to get ahead. There's no chance they're going to be able to pay anything more than just pure subsistence, just existing. So anyways, the article that you mentioned is, a lot of places, as you mentioned, have these limits on what these, loan sharks are allowed to charge people for this kind of financing. And so they went offshore and started developing these online websites where people can go and apply for this kind of loan. And there's no limits because most countries have federal limits on what a legal interest rate is. In Canada, it's 60% is the federally prescribed. If you go over that, it's considered an illegal gouging, immoral, improper, all that. So anyway, they do it through these websites so that no one is controlling the level of legal interest rate. And it was just ironic that you have places like Harvard and MIT and, some of the pension funds for the states of California, Oregon, Maryland, they connected their capital back through this sort of broker equity fund that was literally channeling money into this kind of payday loan sharking offshore. And, I know how that happened, Kerry, because what's happened in the zero interest rate environment where assets are priced to the moon and back and yields are the lowest we've seen in 100 years, there's a whole bunch of people desperately trying to pull rabbits out of hats to, make their target of 8% growth in a world where the risk-free rate is, less than 3%. And they won't relent on putting in more funding or getting serious about restructuring the benefit payout. So they just want to look to magical solutions. And so what happens is they put it through all these different layers. If the board had voted on what should we put money into this, highly sketchy franchise that's trying to charge 600% to people, should we fund that? Of course, they would have said no. But because they can do it through these, corporations or with the comfort of distance and arm's length, putting it through these equity funds, who then turn around and give money to all these unsavories. And we're not just talking that, we're talking organized crime and money laundering, all this stuff. But because they filter it through, the appearance of civility in these equity funds and hedgies and things, then no one really asks too many questions because they're desperately making their, at least they're getting their target, and then they're going to get their quarterly bonuses. Let's not forget that the pension managers are all about quarterly bonuses themselves. Mm-hmm. So again, yield at any price, whether it's illegal, whether it's totally unsustainable, which this stuff is, whether it's completely undermining the whole strength of the economy and the social economic group, it doesn't matter because everybody wants to take every evil dollar they can find. And that's these ridiculous policies. They've turned us all into rogues and thieves, desperately running around taking anything we can get. And it's just it's a race to the bottom. It's degrading, it's destabilizing, and it's just taking us in the wrong direction. Everywhere. People, again, they're not looking at risk. That chart that I put up on the blog today of Hussman's chart of the bubble pricing in the S&P in 2000, 2007. And now in retrospect, everyone says, oh my God, insane risk. No wonder it blew up. So much leverage, so highly valued, way too much aggression and complacency. Well, today we have even worse on every metric. We have the least amount of bears, 13% or something is the new low in people expressing any concern in valuations. Everyone's bought into this whole idea that stimulus will keep it going indefinitely and forever. And no one's paying attention to risk anymore. And so this is how the system blows up. And then in retrospect, they'll all look back and go, oh boy, that was dangerous pricing. There's no question. But those kind of risk managers are useless. If you can't see anything until after it's happened, Kerry, then you're clearly not looking at the right things.
Yeah, well, I have a better name for that company. They should have called it eloanshark.com because that's what they are, loan sharks. They're getting effectively 15% a week interest. That's what Vinny gets. The only thing here is that they won't break your legs if you don't pay, but maybe they would. Who knows? You can't tell about these characters.
Who knows? I mean,
anyone's guess, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
it matters. It matters it matters how you make your money. It matters what risk you expose yourself and your family to reaching for yield. It matters what fiduciary duty you degrade in, if you're managing a pension fund for people who are beneficiaries of the, trusting you to do the right thing, and you're doing, all the wrong things to put them in harm's way so you can get a bonus. All that matters. And it comes back to eat us. And that's what's continually happening here.
It's called the Debasement of Society and of Western values. And then when you look, not that I embrace the jihadi movement by any stretch, but when they look at us and they say we're totally corrupt, who can argue,
they're totally corrupt. They're totally corrupt
of
too.
Course.
Again, I am no fan of the idea that any political party or any geographical region or any religion puts any human outside of the normal patterns of behavior here. I mean, we're all susceptible to this stuff. And, I think the worst thing possible is that you get in a group of people in your clique or club or group or whatever it is who reinforces that you are correct and that everybody else is wrong, right? Once you start believing that you're correct or that you're justified or that you're chosen or that you're privileged or that you have connections, then you've gone down the darkness, because now you're no longer aware of, what's healthy or sustainable. It's all about gimme, 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 and taking and extracting.
Yeah, I'm just saying that when you look at when they point to Western society and the utter corruptness of it, you can't really take issue with that, because you just see it. We're feeding on our own, and it is distressing. And I've been in an industry, without going into great detail, that kind of was predatory like that, but not to that extent, I have to say. And look, that's no justification to declare war. That's a justification to try to do better and to really change your ways and to reform it, which, going back to Elizabeth Warren, while I don't agree with her prescriptions, many of her prescriptions, I do believe that accountability for misdeeds is where it all has to begin. Because if there's no accountability, then you just keep getting the same thing over and over again, and you can't be surprised when it gets worse and worse and worse. And that's what's happening now. We're just circling down the drain, right?
Well, yes, I think we have been circling down the drain. I think that there's, we're getting closer and closer to some big bang moment here where I believe we will have to tabula rasa and start fresh. And I look forward to that, because as painful as that will be to people who are oblivious now, I think it is the necessary reset. And, all these forces that have tried to maintain the unsustainable and keep us from the reset and cleanse that's required have just made it that much worse and that much more, billowing and dangerous now. So it's time, it's time. It's time to admit that everything we were doing before is dangerous and not the path we want to be on. And what I think is interesting, I was alluding to this at the start of our call, Kerry, is the equity markets are driven by the sales force, and they tend to be full of great ego and bravado and BS. Frankly, not too many people do math and work. And let's face it, it's a pretty fungible area. There's no hard maturity dates on common equity. There's no prescribed guaranteed dividend payments. It's all pretty, if you can find a greater fool to buy it off you at a higher price, then that tends to be the way of the world. But not always. Like when they get their knees sort of cut out and then you see prices fall, then that's when value presents. And that's when people need to really sort of try and be ready for that. But when you look at things like the bond market, the currency markets, they've been highly involved in some of this scam and the price fixing over the past few years, but they tend to be more sober in their calculations, at least. And they're not as sexy in the sense of stories that can be easily doled out by the sales crowd. So you look at the US dollar index, it fell, as we know, from 2001, the peak of the tech mess, all the way to double bottomed from 08 to 11. And throughout that period, people kept, they came to the party late. First of all, they were in love with the US dollar at the peak. Nobody thought it could decline. Then when it was sort of double bottoming there in 10, 11, they thought it could never go back up. Well, guess what? It's now broken out of that 12-year downtrend. And, again, it's a relative play. Human behavior is imperfect everywhere. The policies that have gone on have been endemic pretty much everywhere. The Eurozone is probably in worse shape than the U.S. because of its disparate members and its lack of consensus. And who knows if they'll come up with an ECB, policy of buying debt like the QE programs in the States. But all of that is kind of neither here nor there, because the truth is that it hasn't fixed anything in the American economy. It hasn't fixed anything in the Japanese economy that just contracted PS at 7.1% in the latest quarterly GDP. Yeah. So at some point, I think, that the U.S. has tapered. October's to be the last of the QE. They may come back to it later when the downturn gets ugly. But at this point, at least, the U.S. dollar is broken out and is strengthening. Again, relative to other countries, America has more right than many. And I see that as a point of strength and hope. There is still, at least principles of law that are on the books. There's been lack of commitment and will to do the right thing, but the principles of law still stand. And that's more than in many places that don't even have principles of things like equity and rule of law even entrenched in the system. So it's not too late. I don't believe it's too late. I believe that good people have to stand up and open their mouth and not be complacent anymore. And if we insist on doing that, I think that change will eventually come.
Well, I hope you're right. On that note, find Danielle's work at jugglingdynamite.com, and you'll find the link on financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter. Talk to you in a couple of weeks, Danielle. Be well.
Thank you, Kerry. Bye.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.